Thank you all. If we would find our seats. And I want to, am I on? No, okay. Thank you all. Thank everybody for being here to this meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. Berkeley, this is a joint meeting between Budget and Finance and Planning. There's a 6 o'clock council meeting. We are here to complete our requirement by charter to finish the CIB, or Capital Improvements Budget, by June 15th. So we have this meeting and the called council meeting to provide the third reading for the CIB. For the CIB, you also have on the agenda the CSP, which has no timetable requirement by charter, but to go first to our charter required duties today with the CIB. There are 36 amendments. Hopefully everybody has this package in front of you. Yes, Councilman? Oh, turn my mic up. No, not, okay. Do you know how to turn a mic up? How's this? Any? Is this? No. Okay. Well, I'll shout. All right. Hopefully everybody has this package here. I wonder if this microphone works. Is this microphone working any better? No. A little bit better. Well, I could shift over. Any? All right. So at the suggestion of our council, this is a method of proceeding with the 36 amendments, that I'll go through the 36 amendments. Raise your hand if you would like further discussion on those amendments. We will pull that out and then come to that list. So we're creating a consent agenda and effect on the 36. I'll go as quickly as I can. And again, just any council member that raises their hand, will pull that off and then have a deeper discussion. Council Lady Weiner?
Would you indulge me the opportunity to speak about this process in general before we get started?
If you would, and then we'll be expeditious. Thank you. And
Thank
here's
you.
our chairman here. You're on as far as this machine is concerned.
Okay, can y'all hear me or should I just yell?
You should yell.
I'll yell. I can yell. I work with the hearing impaired. I'll yell. Okay. Okay. So I've got just a couple of things to say, and my hope is that I'm not really alone in this, but I think that it's something that we need to think about as we look at these 36 amendments. For the last 6 years, I have loved serving in this body. I think that we've tackled some really tough issues. I think that we have really done our due diligence in a myriad of areas. However, this is really the one time that I am extraordinarily frustrated, and it has nothing to do with any of the specific amendments. It has to do with the process, and it has to do with how we handle our transparency within the community. One of the things that the Vice Mayor asked us to do was to look at transparency and inclusiveness within this community and how we can engage our constituents in a more robust way. Part of that is a process and a schedule that we should be adhering to in terms of managing the CIB and the capital spending plan. And to that end, our chair asked me to, as you guys know, work on a plan for next year. I don't think we need to be pulling things out of the CIB because it's a planning document. It's a wish list, and it offers us the opportunity to engage with our constituents in a more specific way as it relates to each of these projects. So I didn't want to get into and have to stand up and speak about every single one. I just thought that making the statement at the front end that we can always choose not to support items in the CIB, but let's do it in its due time, and let's not randomly pull things out at the last minute when we nor the departments affected have an opportunity to discuss that. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady. And then Councilman Glover, Committee Member Glover.
Just very quickly, Chair. All right, so let me make sure I understand the process you're wanting to follow. Unless we raise our hand, there will be no discussion on it, but that doesn't mean that it wouldn't necessarily pass. It's just we're not going to each, I mean, rather than all 36 of these being discussed on the floor, my assumption is, and I'll use mine as an example, I put in some money into the CIB for Central Pike to help finish along some projects. Really doesn't require a lot of conversation, but if I don't raise my hand, if I don't discuss it, it doesn't mean it's automatically put to the side, correct?
If you raise your hand, there'll be further discussion. Everything where people don't indicate that they want more discussion, we'll treat that as a consent agenda and frankly just deal with it there and then save more discussion time for the areas that people feel need more discussion.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thanks for the clarification.
And thank whoever fixed the audio system. I have an idea who that is. All right, so start on, and this is to create the consent agenda on Bill 2017-736. Again, Chairman Allen will help me look for people's hands, and Mike Jamison. Anybody that raises their hand, then we will put that in the discussion section. Amendment 1, Cooper Bosley Springs Connector. Amendment A. Amendment B, Gilmer Hurt and Scott Davis purchase electronic take system for Metro General Hospital. C, Mendez Project 17WS0002 flood protection system. Hand up. Amendment 4, project number 18FI0002 municipal soccer facility, stadium and fields. Hand up. Amendment 5, new side. Oh, E, sorry, I'm the alphabet. E, new sidewalks on 9th Avenue for John Early Middle School to Kello Street. Councilman Hastings' bill. All right. Hand up, we discuss it later. We did not see a hand up for that one, okay? F, Council Lady Haywood, small-scale library or computer lab in Belshire. All right, no hand up. Amendment G, Council Lady Haywood, new health clinic in the Parkwood area. We don't see a hand up. Amendment H, bus shelter on Brick Church Pike at Westchester to start in FY18. Council Lady Haywood. Did not see a hand up. I, Parkwood Community Center expansion and upgrades. Council Lady Haywood. All right, no.
Chair, just a point of order on this. If the sponsor's not here, how do we handle that? I mean,
we have until the end.
Okay, all right.
To the heel. Okay. Also, Council Lady Haywood, J, Parkland Pocket Park with playground and basketball court for the Golden Valley community. All right, I see no hand up. K, Council Lady Haywood, Village Trail Pocket Park with playground and basketball court. All right. L, Council Lady Haywood, Nature Center and Cedar Hill Park. M, new sidewalk, Councilman Withers, new sidewalks on Seymour Avenue South Side from North 12th Street to 14th Street. All right, I see no handout. N, Councilman Withers, new sidewalks on Ordway Place from North 16th Street to Lakehurst Avenue. All right, no handout. O, Councilman Withers, new sidewalks on Gartland Avenue from North 16th Street to North 17th Street. All right. P, Councilman Withers, new sidewalks on South 17th Street from Shelby Avenue to the Vinnie Links Golf Course. All right, I don't. Q, Councilman Withers, new sidewalks on South 19th Street from Shelby Avenue to its terminus. All right, I don't see a hand up. Council Lady Van Rees, R, new park on Station Camp Boulevard, planning, design, and construction. Okay, I don't see any hands. Councilman Hager, S, project number 18 PR003, increase funding for the renovations of the Old Hickory Community Center. All right, don't see any. Councilman Hager, T, project number 18 PR0016, increase funding for primitive pathways to the Nakarada property. All right. U, Councilman Glover, project 72 PW210B2, increase funding for Central Pike improvements from Old Hickory Boulevard to South New Hope Road. All right. B, Council Lady Allen, sidewalks to fill in gaps and sidewalks on Orleans Avenue between 33rd Avenue South and Ackland Avenue. All right, I don't see any hand up. W, Council Lady Allen, sidewalks, fill in gaps and sidewalks on Chesterfield Avenue. All right. X, project 18 PR0026, transit and infrastructure, add a dog park to Charlotte Park, Council Lady Roberts. Y, Council Lady Roberts, project 18 PR0018, community and economic development, retrofit the regional center at West Park. Okay. Z, Council Lady Weiner, project number to be filled in, rebuild the Red Caboose Park playground, design and construction. Any hands? All right, on consent. Council Lady Murphy, AA, community and economic development, shade sales for McCabe Community Center playground. Consent. BB, Councilman Pulley, project number 16BE0012, Hillsborough High School renovation and addition. Hand up. Council Lady Vercher, CC, project number 04BE0025, J.E. Moss Elementary, renovation modify state start date from FY25 to FY18. Hands up, no, on consent. DD, Council Lady Vercher, acquisition of 2 properties for dog parks in District 28. On consent. EE, Council Lady Vercher, acquisition of 2 properties for pocket parks in District 28. FF, Council Lady Vercher, historical and neighborhood markers in District 28. GG, Council Lady Johnson, project number 13 PW0028, sidewalks, design survey, right-of-way, and decorative lighting, Murfreesboro Pike, SR1 from Ransom Place to Nashville Village. HH, Council Lady Johnson, street lights on Bell Road from Smith Springs Road to Stewart's Ferry Pike, HH. Okay, consent. II, Council Lady Johnson, add decorative lighting along 400 block of Bell Road. Consent. And JJ, Council Lady Johnson, adds District 29 and the crosstown routes starting in FY18. All right, that concludes our first walkthrough. Let me confer with everybody and then come up with the All right, thank everybody. The items that were not on the consent agenda are A, C, D, and BB, if everybody would check their lists to see if those consent items, if they want anything pulled off of consent. Some of the sponsors are not here for the consent item agendas. Why don't we take the consent then on the heel of the session and give them more time to be here? If there are no changes to the items for discussion, then we can start on and with the to be discussed amendments, starting with A, Cooper sponsor project 06 PW0005 Bosley Springs Connector. Is there a motion and a second and discussion? Motion made and seconded, and Councilman Sledge.
Thank you, Chairs. I really admittedly don't know anything about this project. Could somebody talk a little bit about what district it's in and what the proposal is to delete it?
Well, it's in Councilman Murphy's district. I'm the sponsor, so I'll take the, would you like to address this, Council Lady? Or I'm happy to, Council Lady Murphy.
So I'm sorry, the councilman is asking why are we deleting it or wants to know about the project?
Sort of.
Okay, so this is somewhat of a bridge to nowhere is what a lot of the neighbors feel it is, and that it would increase a lot of traffic in their surrounding neighborhoods. And with the way that this area is developing, I don't think that this project is anywhere near in the future. And so Councilman Cooper had requested it be taken out last year. We had talked about it. And I said, why don't we wait a year, get everything under our feet, and then discuss it. And so I'll let Councilman Cooper discuss more directly his desire to take it out.
Well, I will. It's really a dozen years old, and nothing ever happened to it, and none of the studies were conducted. And the recent adoption of the St. Thomas SP actually prevents this from ever happening, that the right-of-way has been used in the green space. And so it's entirely an administrative cleanup, in effect, and I think that's planning's view too. Certainly, Mr. Sloan's view that with the adoption of the St. Thomas SP, some of that right-of-way has been granted that would have gone into the connector, and then so it's actually physically not possible to do that at any point.
Thank you. Thank you. That's helpful.
And Councilman OConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is one where I feel like, because these are, there's probably an argument about whether or not these are scalpel-style refinements or large axe-style refinements. I feel like, deletions of things like this. I recognize that the CIB is riddled with items that have lived for a decade or more, but I also know from the discussions about the kind of St. Thomas West portion of the previous conversation about the AMP, this is something that I know that the Nashville area MPO and other planners had worked on. So while you have asserted that Director Sloan himself recognizes that this is not possible, I think there's a question of whether or not, from a design perspective in the community, there is still a conversation to be had about should there be some kind of connective infrastructure in this area. And this is just one that I happen to know about from previous experience on a metro board that had a project that came right up to that area. So again, I think to me it's, is there harm in leaving the item in, or is it the kind of thing that we hope we would come back to if the infrastructure were deemed appropriate and necessary for that area? So that's just my comment and halfway a question, I guess. Thanks.
Well, responding to your question, I think it would certainly be news to St. Thomas at this point that this was going to happen. And then this is the product of a complicated process where this bridge, whether it was ever really meant to have happened, but 12 years ago it was put in and nothing ever happened on it ever since. And again, St. Thomas itself, Council Lady Murphy and I have been in a series of meetings with them. They have certainly moved on. So if there were to be another project, this particular project, it would have to be re-engineered and it would need to be a different item anyway than this particular project, which takes out some of the Richland Greenway trailhead, goes over the NES power station, goes over the railroad tracks and then lands in front of a shopping center, it was always hard to do and far more expensive than $36 million. But in any case, if there needs to be another connective project, it has to be a different one than this one due to the recently adopted SP. Council Lady, did that answer your question, Councilman?
May I ask a question?
Yes. Council Lady Allen?
Thank you.
Here we are, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to check, I know this was part of the original Harding Town Center design, and that's where it came from in the first place. That also included sidewalks along Harding Road at that point. Would this in any way affect those sidewalks still being in the CIB somewhere, or do they remain separate somewhere else? Because I want to make sure those stay there.
Well, the other transportation plan amendments that were adopted was the widening of Harding, which also has never really been contemplated to happening. And this was a separate bridge from the widening of Harding.
Right.
At the time, the concern was that it landed so close to Harding that there would not be any network improvement in traffic. It would be a big cost, but there would not be any throughput improvement from this very expensive traffic plan.
But again, my question is about sidewalks, which were also part of this. This would not affect the sidewalk piece of this in any way, would it? I just
No,
want to
I
confirm
don't believe
that.
so. This
Okay.
is the bridge. This is the bridge itself.
Great, thank you.
Council Lady Weiner.
So I have several questions, and I'd like to follow up with what Councilmember Allen just discussed. I'd really like that question to be directed to Carrie to see from a planning perspective, and that's my first question. I've got a couple, but I'd like to get that clarified first.
Regarding the sidewalks in Harding Town Center?
So if we pull this out of the CIB, does that impact the sidewalks that were part of that original plan?
Not for the streets that are not the Basri Springs connector. That is depicted in the UDO. And so once that's pulled out, anything else that's required under the UDO would still have to be built by the major and collector street plan.
Is there anything that if we pull this out, is there anything in the Bosley Springs connector CIB line item that would also be impacted? I'm looking for unintended consequences. I want to make sure there are none.
I mean, there is arguably some connectivity that would be lost.
Okay, so that was kind of my suspicion, but obviously we needed to get that clarified. If I might, Chair, ask a couple of questions of finance?
Please.
So, Talia, my first question is, do you have a rough idea of how many items over 6 years old are sitting in the CIB?
That really would be a planning question in terms of how many years they've been sitting in the CIB.
Harry, do you know how many years items over 6 years old have been sitting in the CIB? Or Brandon?
Since 2006.
Nothing from before 2006?
Not that I'm aware of at this moment.
Do we know how many there are?
I'm sorry, what was it? I'm sorry, Could I ask you to restate the question, Council Lady?
Yes, I'll ask it two ways.
Okay.
What is the original date of any item in the CIB? That would be number one. And I think you said 2006, and that's why I asked if there was anything any earlier. The second question, or the second piece of that, in lieu of your response, would be, do you know how many items over 6 years old are in there?
And I apologize, I thought you were asking specifically about the connector.
No.
The earliest item is 1972, we believe, without going through all the numbers at this moment.
So it seems to me, and I'll ask Mike Jamison this question, it seems to me that it makes good sense for us to look at all of the items dating back to 1972 and maybe look at that under separate cover, because if we're going to lose some connectivity by pulling this out, and I certainly appreciate and understand the St. Thomas SP issue, but I'm just wondering if we need to have planning staff and the Planning Commission take a deeper dive into anything that's been sitting in there and make sure that if there's something that we need to pull out, but yet there are pieces of it that we don't want to lose, that we let them address that. Is that doable, Mike? Okay. So in light of that, I don't know that I can support this because I want to make sure that if we pull it out, that we pull it out and make sure we don't lose anything. So, thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Mina Johnson. One moment, I'm sorry. There you are, Mina.
Thank you, Chair. I think we can go either way on this project, but since a question was raised, I would like to offer a little bit of detail. This Basri Springs connector is indeed flyover. It starts from between Harding Place, where the BP station is, and going through that parking lot, and then fly over existing Richland Creek Greenway entrance or parkway or walkway. So actually, design-wide, it at one point, Greenway people came to the Metro Planning Commission public hearing and asked this item to be removed or redesigned because it will effectively destroy the new Richland Creek Greenway. So, however, this idea of connector is were embraced by the planning, so that's the reason this one was here. So we can go either way, as a council lady suggested. We can leave it in here, and until we can have specific design, or since we do not have a specific design, when we have a specific design and we know exactly what will be funded, because right now, 36 million, realistically, it will not fund it. So when we have more specific plan, we can bring it back next year. So I don't know which way will be the committee's will, but I just want to suggest that's a two-way approach.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Vercher, if you give me. There we are. Great.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure that I haven't missed anything in the conversations. The district council member which this project is in is okay with this being removed from the CIB. Am I correct on that? Okay. If the district council member in which this project is okay with it, then I'm okay with it as well. I can support the amendment of removal.
Thank you, Council Lady. Back to Councilman OConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify something, and I appreciate the district-based sensitivity here. However, as someone who has a lot of attention to infrastructure projects in my district from other members throughout the body, I think it's reasonable to continue the conversation on a specific item. This one, I look to planning maybe with a question to clarify. If we're talking about, a recent zoning change, but something still present in a UDO, I'd love to hear whether or not just an alignment issue is something that can be addressed through design. And again, I think if the expectation is that the project amount is incorrectly scoped fiscally, then I think this is one of those things where, again, just deletion is a significant act, whereas amendment later, I think, is something where, again, if it's an infrastructure project that's necessary for the city, for traffic flow, for connectivity, for a variety of reasons, I think it's best to be cautious when deleting items. So I'd love a comment from planning on that point. Thanks.
The UDO does show a rough alignment of the connector. To my knowledge, it hasn't gone to design, and so I think adjustments could potentially be made at that time as long as it was consistent with the UDO. As far as the SP, given that it was just adopted, I'm not sure that I could say for certain whether there's a conflict between the SP and the UDO.
Councilman Sledge, operating as Council Lady Allen.
Apologies, we've got technology issues over here. I think Council Lady Weiner brought up a question that I have because of the CIB process. When we were going through, it's my understanding that kind of when we all came in, when we went through the first round, I guess last fiscal year for the CIB, that there was a pretty robust effort at deleting items. Is that accurate?
We started last year with deleting some of the older items that we knew weren't going to engineering or design. We did attempt this year with the departments to take a second look at those items, especially the older items. There were actually some recommendations at the Planning Commission to remove certain projects that were older. But it is in our work plan to start looking at some of those, especially, the ones that are extremely old, to see whether it is still something that Metro intends to construct.
So it sounds like priority first was stuff that wasn't even in design phase or engineering phase. Then was this project in one of those phases?
No, but it is shown in the UDO.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councilman. Back to Council Lady Murphy.
So I'm sorry I was a little confused earlier because I was not aware that there was so much concern over this project in my district. And some have asked me why I am not carrying this amendment. And Councilman Cooper fortunately lives in my district and therefore has to put up with me and therefore I have to put up with him. And fortunately we have worked together well on a number of zoning and planning issues in my council district. And so I have actually appreciated kind of having an at-large member to help cover issues as they come up in my district and around the district and help me hear the concerns across the district. And so it's been extremely helpful. And so when we discussed this last year, I'd said, let's get through the first CIB and see what's going, get the process, understand how it works as a freshman council member, and then look at taking it out next year. As budget chair, obviously, he has the luxury of being able to file things quickly and in the beginning of the process. Meanwhile, I waited till the last minute to ask Brandon to file the amendment that I have later in our packet that is on our consent. And so I appreciate the fact that this is the first one, and you'll have lots of questions, but I would love this concern next time we have another zoning issue or when I've got a bowling sidewalk that's coming up that's going to be pretty expensive, I think. So I'd really appreciate y'all's help on that one, I guess. This is one that is not even slated to, it looks like the $500,000 is for design, and in 2022, which will be after the end of this term, it looks like it would be built in 2023, which again, I think that there are going to be multiple CIB processes between now and then. So if there are unintended consequences, I appreciate the concern for that, but I think that if we see those come up, we can easily put this project back in. This is not a project that would be designed or built overnight. It is a pretty big bridge that would have to go in. It would affect, as the Council Lady Johnson said, that it would affect the greenways. It would affect a lot of things, a lot of other properties that are in play right now. So I don't have a problem with this coming out as the district council person. If there are unintended consequences of this coming out, seeing as, again, it's not even slated to be in design until 2022, I think we've got some time to correct that. And so, again, I mean, vote your conscience on this, I guess, but at the end of the day, I'm not seeing, planning has said it's not going to mess something up. I haven't heard concerns from the administration or other departments about it messing something up. While I appreciate the concerns, I'm okay with it coming out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Clever.
Call the question.
All right. Those.
Vote by committees, right?
We vote by committees. I guess that's right. So on the Budget and Finance Committee, everyone voting yes, which I guess is to delete the Basri Springs connector. Please raise your hand. And everyone voting no, raise your hand. All right. And Chairman Allen?
Yes, so on the Planning Committee, all those in favor of the amendment, which would delete the project, raise your hand high and hold it up. Thank you. 1, 2. All those opposed? Getting enough arms, okay.
Okay. Thank you. Everyone, now on to C. Councilman Mendez, project number 17 WS0002 flood protection system. Is there a motion?
Move.
Second, and Councilman, the sponsor, Councilman Mendez.
So just as a reminder for a few things, last year this was proposed to be in the CIB at $110 million, and we reduced it to, I think, $15 million to allow for some planning work and for some countywide community engagement about the project. I think by everybody's acknowledgement, due to circumstances that really aren't anybody's fault, the community-wide engagement didn't happen, and that still needs to happen. This year, it's back at a higher price tag, and for this one, I want to remind everybody that once we approve it, it is done. There's enough bonding capacity with water bonds that this will get built without it ever coming back before the council again. So this one's different than a lot of the other ones we deal with. And due to the fact that the community engagement hasn't happened and we're basically on that front the same place we were in a year ago today, I've moved again to remove it just like we did last year.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Bedney.
Thank you, Chair. I want to second what Councilman Mendez said. The concern we had on the southeast is that we are a flood-prone area. I think we heard the same last year, not last year, and last term, about Bellevue and other parts of the city that get flooded. And that's why we wanted to have a comprehensive plan to deal with flooding in the city and not just narrow it to the downtown. So I'm going to second and vote against this, well, vote in favor of removing it. And I hope that you guys will support it as well.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Glover.
Call the question.
All right. Takes 2/3 approval to call the question. Seeing very quickly everyone that would like the question to be called, raise your hand, I guess, so that we can, and then
On the Budget Committee.
on budget. 1, 2, 3. 5, 6, 7. And then how many voting against on budget? 3. So that motion passes to call for the question of planning.
Okay. Planning, we are discussing whether, on call the question. All those in favor of calling the question, raise your hand high, please. Thank you. 1, 2. Okay. All opposed to calling the question on planning? 1, 2, 3. So we do not have 2/3 in favor of calling the question. So Planning Commission is still discussing, Planning Committee is still discussing this. I had a question. So we had allocated $15 million last year. Was that in the CIB? And is that $15 million still available for the community engagement, which is an important thing to happen? I don't know if that's finance or Mr. Mendez. I'm asking that question too.
I'm getting a head nod that yes, it's still available.
It is still available. Okay, thank you.
All right, then working on this list, Councilman Taker.
Let me remind everybody about this project. I've been against it from the very beginning. And I want to remind you, I brought up last year, this year again, if they put this in, when it first came up, it was going to run about $250,000, $200,000 a year to maintain it. Now they're talking about $500,000 a year to maintain this flood wall. And it takes 8 hours to put this wall up. And I'll go back to the speech that I said before. I was standing at 2nd and Broad on Sunday morning when a police officer told me to move back to 6th Avenue. They were going to flood downtown from the Old Hickory Dam, and that's exactly what happened about 30 minutes later. So I'm adamantly agree to pull this out of here and keep it out of here.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Withers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to sort of go on record and say that I do believe that we need to protect our downtown assets that we have invested in so heavily. I'm also aware that a significant portion of the flood wall is not actually a wall, it's pumping stations, which are engineering facilities that will be needed regardless of what happens. Some of the flood mitigation strategies in outlying areas in the county, including in parts of District 6, are primarily the buyout program of some of those houses. So as an overall statement, I believe that we need to continue that discussion. I am willing to support the amendment in this case based on the knowledge that we do still have funding to continue that community engagement. But I just wanted to go on record and say that we need to take care of the things that we have invested our taxpayer dollars in so heavily. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman OConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think to Councilman Withers' point here, we did create, this was not just the single thing that came out of the Nashville response to the flood. It was certainly one that caught a lot of attention. I think got caught up in some other controversial CIB items toward the end of the Dean administration, and caught some tension between the Dean administration and the Metro Council at that time. But we have a new council and the same problem. There's a river running through our city. We hope that it is 500 years before we see an event of this kind. But when we've seen high periods of intense rain, which we have seen since the Barry administration was seated and this council was seated, people send me pictures of flooding on low-lying creeks all the time. We've watched the river get high. There was a unified flood preparedness plan. This is but one element of that, and I think protecting the other parts of the city without protecting the economic engine of the city sets us up for a repeat of this. I spent a little over a year on a community advisory committee or citizens advisory committee for Metro Water, looking at combined sewer overflows, and got to see an extraordinary amount of the engineering talent in that department, as well as the creative solutions to a number of things that they're working on. I think in terms of the future of the city, there are also some positive side effects of this infrastructure project. It looks at a potential Blueway network leveraging the river. It's a participant in various elements of riverfront redevelopment. And again, if I look at the seriousness of deleting items from the CIB, this is one where it cuts right through the district that I represent. So we just had a conversation about that. This is a major piece of infrastructure. I understand and expect the scrutiny about it. I think this item should stay, and I will support its inclusion in the CIB.
Council Lady Dowell.
Thank you. I just wanted to just make a clarification with regard to calling the question and ending our discussion. These meetings are committee meetings, and if we're not able to discuss legislation here, we cannot discuss it outside of the public without notice, then when can we have these conversations? And so I ask my council peers to be sensitive to the fact that it's not about efficiency of going through these different amendments, but it's really vetting these things out and making sure that we're having the right amount of dialogue to make a good decision on it one way or the other. So I ask that you keep that in mind as we go through the various amendments, because I would like to hear some of the conversations around it. And I would love to make sure that people have the opportunity to have those discussions, especially since we've set up a committee system in order to facilitate those discussions. Now, if we're in the middle of our council meeting, then it's fine. But in a committee meeting, I think we need to be respectful of that, and that's all.
Thank you, Council Lady. Council Lady Mina Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with both Councilman Mendez and also Councilman Withers and Councilman O'Connor's point. However, I just want to reiterate this funding mechanism is different. If we fund this $125 million, Metro Water will be able to start the project without our further approval. For that reason, I think before we proceed this project, we do need to understand pros and cons, and not only flood wall, but flood mitigation and pumping station. I think as each district council member, we do need to understand the importance of the project. So for that, I think we have not got any report back from the Metro Stormwater and Metro Water Division. For that reason, I am in support of removing this capital improvement budget of this year's plan, and then bring back when they are ready to present to the specific plan to this body.
Thank you, Council Lady. Seeing no one else in the queue, I've been operating the microphones for...
You've done a fine job.
Chairman Allen. Seeing no one else in the queue, then I guess we'll have a Budget and Finance Committee vote and then a Planning Committee vote. Everyone on the Budget and Finance Committee who are for Councilman Mendez's C amendment, which would remove the flood protection wall, please raise your hand. All opposed? Right. The ayes have it.
Okay, Planning Committee will vote on the amendment to remove this item from the CIB. All those in favor of the amendment to remove this, please raise your hand high so we can count it. Okay, all opposed? Thank you.
The ayes have it on both committees, and we're to Councilman Mendez. Did you have a final comment? On to Councilman Mendez's as the sponsor of D, project number 18 FI0002, Municipal Soccer Facility Stadium and Fields. Is there a motion? Motion made and second. Councilman Mendez, the sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I filed this amendment so we had an opportunity to discuss this simply because it's a $150 million bond issuance. It was listed for fiscal year 18. And while there's been some conversation in the media from the administration, I don't think we've had any discussion at the council level about this, and given it $150 million in fiscal 18, I filed this so we could have a conversation. And working with the administration yesterday and this morning, in talking about my questions, they issued the memo that we've got on our desk from Mr. Riebling, which frankly answers my questions and gives a timeline, as well as indicating the commitment to making it be a public-private partnership, and also going through the importance of this being in the CIB to the bid process. And so with that information, I would move to withdraw the proposed amendment.
Motion made to withdraw. Is there a second? The motion, don't need to vote on it. It's withdrawn by sponsor. And then for planning, is that?
Same thing.
Same thing. Okay, withdrawn by sponsor. All right. Which brings us to BB. Councilman Pulley is the sponsor. Project number 16BE0012, Hillsborough High School renovation and addition. Is there a motion? Moved and seconded. Seeing no one, and Councilman Pulley, I believe you're on.
Yes, thank you. The discrepancy is actually in the capital spending plan. The capital improvements budget already has the appropriate amount in it. We're a little short in the spending plan, so it's not necessary to file this amendment. Being as it's already moved, I would move to withdraw at this point.
Also, move to withdraw, all right, by the sponsor. And then I believe that's also withdrawn from the Planning Committee. All right. Which brings us back to the consent agenda. I've got a... Okay. Two of our sponsors on consent agenda items are not here. We can move to suspend the rules and adopt the consent agenda without being here. Yes, Councilman Mendez.
Maybe I'm mistaken, but I'm not sure anybody's actually moved the bill.
Oh, all right.
Which I would do. It's 736, right?
Well, are we moving the bill or are we moving the consent agenda?
We have to start with the amendments.
We're moving the consent agenda items.
I guess my point is, I don't think we've said at any point, we're talking about a consent agenda for amendments to Bill 736? All right, thank you.
So I believe there was a motion and a second when we started out, but if so, is there a motion and a second? All right. On the consent items.
But we have to vote to suspend the rules first, don't we?
But we would have to vote to suspend the rules.
So moved.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules? And a second to suspend the rules in order to take up the consent agenda items? Is there a motion? All right, Councilman Glover?
Just, who are the two, which ones of these are we suspending the rules for?
Hastings, which is E, and Karen Johnson, which are the last four.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So in those 5 items,
Yeah.
and then I see Councilor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair Cooper. I'm not sure if I'm out of order in inquiring. I apologize. I missed the initial discussion about things being placed on consent. If I had a general question as to parks-related items, various parks that were put in here, is there an appropriate way for me to inquire with the sponsors of the amendments if they conferred with parks on that, or if those are reflected in plan to play, or they're just, and that may be out of order, but.
Well,
okay, it
nothing's
is out of
completely
order.
out of the order.
Okay.
If you had a specific question on any of the items which are on consent, which are all the items that have not had this discussion from A, C, D, and BB, all other items, if you had a question for those sponsors, I believe now would be the time to ask.
Alrighty, well, I see that one sponsor is not present. I think another sponsor acknowledged she has spoken to Parks about it. Are there, I believe, Council Lady Haywood, did you speak to Parks about your Parks-related addition to the CIB?
The answer to that is yes. I've unequivocally spoken to Parks about it on many occasions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to inquire.
Thank you. So we are at a motion to suspend the rules to allow the consent agenda to go forward. Actually, we have a sponsor here, so we don't need to suspend the rules except for Hastings, which is one item, E. So the motion would be to suspend the rules to adopt item E onto this consent agenda. Motion made and seconded. Any opposition to suspending the rules? Then we'll proceed with E on the agenda. The sponsor is here. So for the consent agenda items, seeing no one in the queue for discussion, all in favor of the consent agenda items, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, that's Budget and Finance, and then.
Okay, now Planning Committee, we're voting on the consent agenda. All those in favor of the consent agenda, it's indicate by saying aye. Any opposed? Consent agenda is recommended
Okay,
by the Planning.
all right. And seconded, all right, the vote on 736 as amended, properly made and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing no one in the queue, all in favor of 736 as amended, please say aye. All opposed, that's Budget and Finance.
Planning Committee, we are voting on BL 207-736 as amended many times. All those in favor, say aye. Any opposed? Bill is recommended as amended.
The bill is recommended. Now there is an adjourned council meeting starting at 6.
We have another bill.
At 6, I'm just keeping track of time. And this is on to the
Resolution.
And now we have on our agenda the CSP in the back of your packages for discussion to 713, RS 2017-713, Amendment A, B, C, D, E, F, and G for discussion. All right, so this is not required by the charter. 713 is not required by the charter to be passed by June the 15th, so keep that in mind as our discussion progresses. The 713 can be deferred to another meeting particularly if we feel that the discussion is not adequate. But that being said, is there, we'll start on the amendments. Councilman Mendez, I know, has been sitting in front. Yes, Councilman Mendez.
All right, so first I'd like to move Resolution 713. Just a second. Amendment A is something I proposed that was designed to get $1 million available to the farmers market for HVAC. And in conversations over the last 24 hours, it's become clear that there is money available to fix the HVAC without it being in the capital spending plan. So I don't plan to pursue this resolution. I appreciate Finance and the Farmers Market Administration working through ironing that out.
So that's a motion to withdraw?
Right.
A motion to withdraw, seconded. All right, Councilman Glover?
You know, Chair, with the amendments, looking at some of the things that we're adding in here, if we've got to deal with the CIB, and I know the Vice Mayor is trying to get us started here at 6 o'clock. So I'm going to move that we defer this bill until next Tuesday at our regular council meeting, or Monday for the committee, and then Tuesday for the meeting. So I'll move for one meeting deferral.
A motion for one meeting deferral. Is there a second? A second. All in favor of a one meeting deferral, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
No.
No. All right, Budget and Finance, if you would raise your hand on a one meeting deferral, please say aye. Please raise your hands. Okay, and then all against the one meeting deferral, please raise your hands. Okay. All right, Budget and Finance, that motion fails. And Planning.
All right, was that motion made for planning? All right, so Planning Committee is voting on the motion to defer. All those in favor of a one meeting deferral on the Planning Committee, raise your hand to negate and hold it up. I see 2, 3. All those opposed? Thank you.
All right. So the motion's made to proceed, and then on Amendment A to 713, that has been withdrawn by the sponsor. All right, Amendment B to 713. Is there a motion? So moved, seconded. Discussion on Amendment B to 713 to the sponsor, Councilman Mendez.
So the capital spending plan included a $4 million contingency as drafted, and this amendment would move $3.5 million out of the contingency, make it available to Nashville General Hospital. So the total amount approved by the capital spending plan would remain the same. The contingency would be reduced to $500,000, and 3.5 would be allocated to the hospital.
Thank you, Councilman. Council Lady Weiner. Sorry, there we are.
Thank you, Chair. I need to recuse myself from this vote.
Thank you, Council Lady. Councilman Pridemore.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to have someone from the administration discuss the contingency budget. If we could, going from the purposes of $4 million to $500,000. I'd like to see what effect that might have.
Okay, I could take that question, Councilman. The contingency is specifically set aside to provide a contingency for the projects that are listed in the capital spending plan. And in addition to that, there are certain projects that are listed on this, within this plan that we have a % for the arts requirement, and at least somewhere between $1.3 to $1.4 million of that contingency amount is required to be set aside for arts funding. So we do not have that much, we don't have that funding available to do a transfer out of that contingency account. The only way that you could address this, my understanding from legal, is we would have to actually increase the value of the capital spending plan to increase the contingency should we want to provide additional funding to hospitals.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, are there other, again, speaking to the administration, are there other projects that have that requirement where you have to have so much in the contingency plan fund?
It's a good practice. I mean, I don't think that it's a legal requirement. I'm looking at legal in terms of what that contingency value ought to be, but we generally try to stay in about a 2% range for contingency. And that contingency would be available for not only general government, but Metro Nashville Public Schools projects. So please keep in mind, too, that that contingency amount is set aside for both portions of the capital spending plan.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I'm not opposed to the funding. I'm just opposed to maybe the source of the funding on this manner because of what other projects might fall or fail to be funded because of this. That's my only concern. So
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Withers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My line of reasoning is very similar to Councilmember Pridemore's, and I appreciate his experience that he's brought to bear in phrasing that so eloquently. And I would concur with him that it's not a matter of that the hospitals aren't important. It's just a question of, is this an appropriate funding source? And I would say, just based on construction costs and things like that escalating so quickly in Nashville, that only having a 2% contingency or something like that is actually a pretty narrow margin anyway. So I would not be inclined to support the amendment either. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just briefly from experience, we did go a little over when we renovated Stratford. It was a great $20 million project, but I'm sure we needed some contingency funds that year. And yeah, I just reiterate, I think that's a good practice to make sure we have that. I'm all for figuring out something for the hospital, though. However, we need to throw some weight on the wish list or whatever we can do to figure something out for that funding, but we need that contingency money. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Back to Councilman Mendez.
I appreciate everybody's points. I really do. This is not easy to figure out. I would make the point that we've got a $100 million hospital with, I think, $21 million worth of deferred maintenance on it, and we're about to approve a budget that has literally $0 for capital expenses, $0 for capital expenses. And as important as the issues as my colleagues have raised are, for me, I think we're sending a really tragically bad message to the men and women who work every day at the hospital and the community by funding capital improvements at literally $0 for the hospital. If I had a better idea for where the money could come from, I'd offer that idea. I think that this $4 million is already only a 1.3% reserve, not a 1%, not a 2% reserve. And I think that given the circumstances, given the messages we send to the hospital and the people who work there and who are patients there, I think that this is a change that we should make. So I would encourage you to vote for it.
Thank you, Councilman. Seeing no one else in the queue, all in favor of the Budget and Finance of Amendment B to 713 on this capital funding for the hospital, please raise your hand. And all opposed? Oh, did you get Berkeley?
I'm against it.
So it's 5-5 tie at Budget and Finance to.
This is actually not on the planning.
This is not on.
I was wrong on voting
planning.
on last one.
Okay, so.
I should actually leave.
So 5-5 tie, not recommended. All right, amendment. Okay, can we redo this for our tally? All in favor of B, please raise your hand. Aye. 6. Or no?
Yeah,
right?
I was in no.
So 6. And then all opposed, please raise your hand high. Four. Okay, sorry, that's a correction, an important correction. Passes 6-4. That's the 10 committee members. All right, so it is recommended to the council 6-4 for Amendment B. Amendment C to 713. Councilman Mendez is the sponsor. Is there a motion? Motion made and seconded. Our sponsor.
This one's housekeeping. The capital spending plan refers to planning and design for the Emergency Communications Center and the Juvenile Justice Center, but the actual initial resolution doesn't refer to planning and design, so the amendment simply adds planning and design to the text of the initial resolution. Finance doesn't have an objection to this one.
Seeing no one else in the queue, all in favor on Budget and Finance Committee to do Amendment C to 713, please say, raise your hand. Aye. All opposed? All right. Amendment C is recommended to the council. Amendment D to 713, Councilman OConnell is the sponsor. Is there a motion? Made and seconded. Councilman OConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd actually like to move to withdraw with a brief comment, please.
Please.
So I participated in Bike to Work Day this year, and it was one of those moments where I had the luxury of biking from my home, which lies within the interstate and river boundary of the urban core. For those who biked from elsewhere around the city, trying to get into downtown Nashville to arrive at Public Square, which was the location of the event, they didn't fare as well as I did, right? There are very, very few safe ways for cyclists in this city trying to use transportation in a mode other than car to arrive safely in downtown in the urban core by bike. When I saw this year's capital spending plan arrive almost immediately on the heels of our just off the presses strategic plan for sidewalks and bikeways, Nashville Walk and Bike, which recommended an $8 million spend to get us to the to basically playing catch up to where we should have been. I mean, we've had a years-long deficit of revising our infrastructure to support the Nashville of the future. You know, we'd look at the decline in driver's license application rates among people under the age of 20. We look at the growth and interest in living in the urban core. And if you are in East Nashville, if you're in Five Points, if you're in the Melrose Corridor, if you are in Metro Center, if you are in Elliston Place, if you are in the Nations, if you're in any of the neighborhoods in Nashville that think of themselves as urban neighborhoods, you basically cannot actually access the core of our city safely, really, truly by foot or by bike. And trying to use transit is its own story, which we might talk about on the next amendment. For this one in particular, my hope was to try to reflect the priorities expressed in Nashville Walk and Bike. I know the mayor's office has introduced its own 3-year action plan on transportation covering a variety of modes, including Vision Zero. I think failing to reach the $8 million target of Nashville Walk and Bike is in fact a dangerous failure on moving our modes, especially as we're having difficult conversations around other corridors, including 8th Avenue South right now. So that said, I have talked extensively with Metro Finance and the administration about strategies for accelerating that as a priority of the administration and perhaps this council. I think in order to do that, we'll come back. My hope is that a subsequent capital spending plan or follow-ups in terms of action items within that action plan will do so. I did not want to risk our bond authority and rating as a city to get here, but I did think that the gap from $2 to $8 million as $6 million was not an extraordinary ask. Even so, I think we will withdraw this and have this discussion another day. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. The sponsor withdrawal, I believe it is withdrawn. Councilman Mendez, did you have any comment to make? All right, thank you. That was a carryover. So Amendment D is withdrawn. On to Amendment E to 713. Councilman OConnell is the sponsor. And back to Councilman OConnell. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This one, as you can see, again, is not, this is a large ask. This is transit. And to me, the pair of these amendments demonstrate a thing that I think it's time to recognize about Nashville, right? There are some important strategic initiatives throughout the budget. We all have the luxury of serving for 4 years together between the mayor's administration and this particular Metro Council. And, you know, I think for me, my constituents in terms of whether it is noise or infrastructure and lack of access to that infrastructure, but certainly for every person that I meet that has grown up here in the high schools that I represent in my district, for those people moving from other markets that do have major transit systems, for those people thinking about the future and how their children will move around the city, lifelong Nashvillians who are now raising children of their own and have recognized our shortfalls in the ability to create a comprehensive transit system, and looking at what's in front of us, right? We have In Motion, which was a process that began in 2015, spilled into 2016, had an extraordinary amount of community buy-in, more participation in terms of a planning process than Nashville MTA had ever had. Every single item on this list for the capital spending plan is something that was directly in Nashville MTA's ask in this year's budget hearings. I encourage all of my colleagues, and frankly anybody watching this on the Metro Nashville network, to go back and look at that ask. It has 4 tiers directly drawn from In Motion as a strategic priority, and I worry that even with the 3-year action plan, we are falling short on the opportunity to create neighborhood transit centers. Without this amendment, we are not going to create any crosstown routes of any significance right now. We are not going to work on the initial steps to do regional rail. We are not going to get to the frequent transit network that we need to support whatever it might be that comes out of a referendum to create a dedicated funding source for transit, which has been proposed for next year. If that passes, we still need the framework shoring it up to support it. If that fails and we don't do this, we have lacked a plan B. Yet again, though, knowing that $70 million is an extraordinary ask in a time when we are trying to be mindful of a legacy of debt that we are still working on, not wanting to create an increase in our bond capacity and damage our rating, I am looking forward to ways in which the mayor's 3-year action plan actually starts to attack some of these issues with urgency, because I think without this, we are not demonstrating in this fiscal year that we have an urgent opportunity to generationally transform the way people move about the city. I think with 2 years remaining after this, you know, and giving up on a year where we have the opportunity to respond to this with urgency, it is a mistake, and yet I think it would be a similarly grievous mistake to damage our bond rating. And so, Mr. Chairman, I will move to withdraw this amendment as well.
Thank you, Councilman. Deeply felt, I know every word. The motion to withdraw is accepted, and Amendment E is withdrawn. Amendment F to 713, myself as the sponsor, creating a caption under affordable housing to include the purchase of land for use by nonprofit affordable housing developers. Is there a motion? Motion made and seconded. Councilman Sledge.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Acknowledging I'm not on the Budget Committee. I had a question, and I'm hoping either finance or legal can help me with this. The description, my understanding with these bonds is that we are hoping to do the first portion of that, preservation of existing affordable housing units, but I have a question on the second portion about purchase of land. It's my understanding, I'm not sure that we can use these bonds for that purpose. Is that correct?
That is correct. We cannot use the GO bond proceeds for private use, which is what that essentially would be if the nonprofits were using it. It's going to implicate a constitutional issue of lending of credit.
Thank you. My fear then is that if we put this under, it would greatly jeopardize the use of these funds, and I would ask the Budget Committee members to please vote against.
Councilman Mendez?
I think Councilman Sledge basically asked my question. I was trying to, I wanted to know what this is driving at and whether it was going to be limiting in a way that wasn't helpful. And I think we got the answer, so I'll let it move on.
Thank you, Councilman. I appreciate both Councilman's suggestions and the Law Department and trying to be responsive to our nonprofit affordable housing developers. I put this in, and I would like to withdraw it. And the withdrawing being so moved on to Amendment G of 713, Myself as the sponsor, moving the $3 million from Metro Schools for Sidewalks to bikeways. Is there a motion? Made and seconded. Council Lady Johnson.
Is this taking money away from what they're required to do with sidewalks for their portion? Because schools has to build a certain percentage, so does this do anything to that?
Well, we have Mr. Clay here to address that question specifically.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Hank Clay from Metro Nashville Public Schools. I'm sorry I didn't hear the question.
You're required to build a certain percentage of the sidewalks with each project. Does this do anything to take money away from what you're required at the time of construction?
This particular amount was given by the mayor's office, put in there by the mayor's office, not part of our request, but we're really committed to working with Public Works, if y'all end up passing it, to figure out the right path forward. And there's no doubt that you all know your districts well and know how important the actual connectivity from the houses to the schools are, and we're happy to be a part of any of those conversations.
Okay, I'm okay. I understand he's giving clarification. I just wanted to make sure that was still in place. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Council Lady. Council Lady Henderson.
Thank you, Chair Cooper. I wonder if the administration could speak to, nobody loves sidewalks more than I do. But with our new prioritization system, I know that proximity to schools really, bumps a sidewalk project up. And so I appreciate the gesture around connectivity to schools, but it looks like we've set up our prioritization system to really push those to the fore. And when school projects, new construction comes, I hope that sidewalks are factored into the cost of construction. So I do wonder what kind of the motivation was for the $3 million. Was it sort of a, with all due respect, kind of a feel-good, yay, sidewalks in schools kind of a budgetary, or what was the need here?
Not necessarily we feel good about it, but in terms of providing safety for the kids to walk to school is always a priority, and we need many sidewalks through the city, and the mayor felt that it was important to speed up the process for getting sidewalks closer to the schools where the kids are.
Understood. Mr. Claxton, can you speak perhaps to the prioritization system? I know I have concerns sometimes in that a lot of our school location projects put schools in places where we don't necessarily have dense residential development. And so kind of balancing that need of obviously keeping kids safe walking to school, but the number of kids that are potentially walking to school, and kind of how our new prioritization system addresses school proximity and so forth. Could you address that? Or Ms. Logan, thank you.
It's our understanding that the priority system uses the proximity to schools as one of the many criteria. And so I think I would say that what this amount would do would allow a certain amount of those school sidewalks that are high on the priority list to be funded.
Understood. But is there elsewhere in our budget where we're setting aside a particular bucket of money for a certain type of sidewalk? I know we had looked at, from a prioritization standpoint, 500 linear feet, filling in gaps and things like that. And I understood that we would not create a separate bucket for those type projects. So would this be unique to our sidewalk program in that we'd be setting this aside in this way?
From a planning perspective, I think there are certain kinds of geographic areas that we could look at for priorities. Schools would be one of them. Proximity to transit, those sorts of things could be another. I think what you're asking about is a funding perspective. And
yes.
That's kind of, I'd have to defer to finance on that.
Right, and
So Talia, then, is this unique from a funding perspective as to type of infrastructure, setting that aside?
No, there's nothing unique about that.
So elsewhere in our sidewalk budget or bikeways or otherwise, we have said for this particular type, transit, school, parks, proximity, we've set aside a particular amount solely for that previously?
We have, you have not seen the specific line item like you do here, but schools have always been a priority in the sidewalk.
Oh, absolutely, and so they should be, but I think, you know, it's also important for kids to be able to bike to school. So I'm really torn on this one. I support what Chair Cooper's trying to do here. I think it's in line with what Councilman OConnell spoke to. Can you speak to, Talia, why the administration would be concerned if this were, do you have any concerns about this amendment?
I think that the CSBS file is the appropriate thing to do based on the mayor's priorities. She felt that we needed to have an additional emphasis around schools, and that's what's recommended before you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady Henderson. I see Mr. Profit and Mr. Clay in the back, and if I could maybe help smooth the discussion here. Mr. Profit or Mr. Clay, is there a list of specific sidewalks on MMPS property that are slated to be built with this $3 million?
I believe since this is a new source of funding, there has not been coordination yet between Public Works and schools. But if the council were to go forward with this, we would work hard to develop a great list for that. And I also want to clarify a previous comment made by the council lady that when we are building a new school, we do build sidewalks on the school property. And so I think this would be an effort to connect the school-based sidewalks with sidewalks in the community so that kids can actually get from their houses to the schools themselves.
Off of MMPS property?
I think, and connecting, there may be some existing projects where there's not appropriate sidewalks on MMPS property, but all of that would be coordinated if these funds were to go through.
Thank you. Councilman Mendez.
Just to piggyback on what Councilmember Henderson was asking about, I think everybody would agree that we're trying to maximize kids getting to school safely. I guess my question is for the sponsor, Mr. Chair. What was the thought process or conversations where the sense is that making this amendment makes it better, safer, more efficient for kids to get to school? And then my follow-up question was going to be whether there's consensus among school and administration about that. And I'm sensing the answer to that's no from the questions. But that's the two-part question: is how does this further everybody's goal of getting more kids to school more safely, and is there in fact consensus about the change or not?
I believe part of your question was for me. The purpose of the amendment was a little bit based on discussion with schools that they were unaware of specifically at this point where you would build sidewalks, and yet I think the bicycle people have a very well thought out plan, and for the next 12 months it seemed like you could do an immediately good thing where the need for it has not been, there's no list, there's not a specific need. No one that I'm aware of can point to a place on MNPS property where there's not a sidewalk currently. Now, that may be the case in a full study, but I'd not been able to come up with that particular list. So it seemed appropriate to have this discussion of priorities. Councilman.
And then the schools and the administration in agreement on this, or on the change, or not?
In terms of what's been recommended, or what has been recommended in here, I think that the administration and schools and Public Works in particular are together, that we believe sidewalks are important to schools. I think if this funding is approved, we will sit down and between Public Works and schools and prioritize where those projects go. And I do think we are in agreement on that. What I do not agree with is that there is not a plan for sidewalks. I think that there is a study has been completed for the city in terms of where the sidewalk needs are, and that includes sidewalks around schools.
Okay.
And the other party is schools?
Thanks, Chairman. Hank Clay from MMPS. Yes, we're fully supportive of this. This was not in our particular request, but it is part of our collaboration with Metro General Government.
So you all are supportive of the capital spending plan as presented?
We are.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Withers.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I actually agree with a lot of my bicycle advocates that we have in East Nashville, maybe a little bit selfishly, but I do have generally a very walkable district in District 6, and we definitely have a lot of gaps. But some of the things that make our neighborhood, and I'm certain that Councilmember Allen's neighborhood is that way as well, but is that we have a very active bike community, and we have a lot of parents and even children who would like to bike to school if they felt that they could do that safely. And sometimes we have volunteers who are sort of a chaperone for a bike bus, but we need to have more of that. And I believe from my experience that $3 million of sidewalks will get you a few blocks of sidewalks in the county, whereas $3 million additional that's dedicated to bikeways could potentially get quite more. We could get more bang for our buck that way and help our young people get to and from school safely on bicycles. And so for those reasons, I'm inclined to support this amendment, and I appreciate the chair for bringing it.
Thank you, Councilman. Chairman Allen?
Thank you. I also, I'm so grateful to this mayor for the $30 million that she's dedicated both these past 2 years for sidewalks, and it's thrilling to me that we're finally moving forward with a huge investment in that. My understanding is that there are other sources that we could tap, like Safe Routes to School grants that could probably make up that $3 million for sidewalks that is not necessarily available for bikeways. So as much as I love having sidewalks built, I think we can have our cake and eat it too if we pursue those Safe Routes to Schools and shift this money over to bikeways. So I support it as well.
Thank you, Chairman. Councilman OConnell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that might be my question for the administration. With knowing that we've got $30 million programmed for sidewalks, why is this particular $3 million parceled out into something specific for schools, right? We've been told a few times that, we can use other sources for bikeways. We can, there's this kind of, generic paving budget out there that could be used for a variety of things. So why not just, siphon off $3 million of the 30 and program those specifically for schools? I think that would be the clarification I'd seek. Thank you.
We just believe that the total investment that has been recommended for sidewalks is all needed for that initiative, and we'd prefer to have an additional amount for schools.
Thank you. And then Council Lady Johnson, Karen Johnson.
I know I'm back on it again.
Yes.
After all this discussion, my concern about shifting the money away from sidewalks to bikeways, I've got an issue in my area where I have been able to have bikeways placed around the schools. My issue is the lack of connectivity with the sidewalks. And for instance, when we built Smith Springs Elementary, all of us remember that discussion that the schools were able to build their sidewalk, but Metro contributed nothing, which leaves the children no opportunity to walk to the school, and so our transportation costs are higher because they have to be bused a short distance to the school for the lack of the sidewalks. So I just personally don't like this amendment if it's taking away money from Metro providing that additional so that schools like that who lack connectivity with the sidewalk for the children won't have that. The bikeways do nothing but allow, the children to bike, but that's already in place. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady. Councilman Davis, Scott Davis.
I know we all care about our schools, and thank you for letting me speak. I'm going to be quick. In some aspects, bike lanes are great. Everybody wants more of them. But before we add more bike lanes to certain areas, we need to make sure that the kids can afford the bikes first. And we all know the kids have legs, and so the sidewalks connecting to the schools, and I'm hoping that if we don't delete this, that the $3 million sidewalks are going to neighborhoods whose schools who don't have connectivity or who really need it. Maybe schools in North or South Nashville that are lacking in sidewalks. And I know there's a couple of schools in Mr. Leonardo's district that need sidewalks too, in that area. So there are many schools in Nashville that need that connectivity. And, so before we start adding more bike lanes, I feel we need to make sure the kids can afford the bikes first, because there's no use in adding the lanes if the kids can't afford bikes, period. So that's all.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Bednay.
Yeah, just like they said, I've been waiting on sidewalks in my district connecting schools with neighborhoods since I got elected. So please don't remove that. We need as many sidewalks as possible. In my area, we need safe places, safe ways for kids to get to school. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Swope.
Call the question.
Call the question. Amendment G, seeing no one else in the queue. Also, all in favor on Budget and Finance of Amendment G, please raise your hand. Amendment G to 713. All in favor, raise your hand. Aye. Aye. All opposed?
6.
5. I'm
I
hearing
counted
5 to
6.
5. No
I
recommendation.
counted 6. I counted 6.
Berkeley's counted 6.
Raise them higher.
Raise them higher.
Thank you.
I see 3 on this side, 3 on that
There's
side.
Anthony. Okay. The amendment fails 5 to 6. And with that, we come on to RS 2017-713. Is there a motion? Motion made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the passage of 713 itself for the committee's recommendation? All in favor of 713, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, 713 is recommended to the council. And with that, the Budget and Finance Committee is adjourned. And not speaking for the chairman, the planning
Was adjourned earlier.
Planning Committee is adjourned. And we move on to the adjourned meeting of the council.